Claire from Detroit, Barbara from Richmond, Ruth, Joy, Connie, Chelsea, Jenny, goes fast, Solvang, California, Jane, Modesto. So I love seeing so many of you back again and again every Friday. That makes me so happy. From Australia, Arlington, Texas. Oh, Milwaukee, Karen, happy Friday. Santa Fe, yay. St. Paul, Minnesota, Alexandra from Paris. Fred from Paris, Tamara from Georgia, Minerva from New Mexico. So fast. Upstate New York, Petersburg, Florida. Wow. Deborah, can't keep up. Sandra Ostro, standing with you guys from Newfoundland. Jennifer Zeal, Brooklyn. Jane from Montreal. Rachel from Austin. Maggie, Santa Monica. Go so fast. San Francisco, Seattle. Olivia, signed up for my texting shift.
Work is eternal. The winner is Jane Fonda. Her activism is fierce.
They know what's happening in America today.
And Jane Fonda brings that passion.
Speak truth to power. Speak truth to power.
To a special Fireside Fire Drill Friday. Right now on Sirius XM Progress.
Hi, everybody. Glad to have you with us. We're back for the 21st weekly virtual Fire Drill Fridays. And today we have a very special guest. Mary Trump is going to be joining us. And I'm so honored to be able to welcome her in a few minutes. And we also have an exciting new collaboration starting today with Sirius XM. We're simulcasting right now to Sirius XM Progress. So hello to all of you who are listening over the airwaves. Welcome to Fire Drill Fridays community. And if you are joining via Sirius XM and have questions for today's guests or for me, please call 1-866-997-4748. That's 866-997-4748. But if you're calling, if you're joining via Zoom or other social media channels, please put your questions in the chat boxes there, the way we always do. For those of you who can't see me, I'm Jane Fonda, and I'm so glad that you're able to join us today for another Fireside Fire Drill. You know that thanks to you, our movement is growing and we're building people power together, not just to elect climate champions up and down the ballot in November, but also to continue building power into 2021 and beyond. Since March 3rd, 3 million people have watched and joined and taken action with us, 1.6 million just in June alone. So thank you all so much. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling your collective passion, and it really makes me feel that we can do this. So thank you. And if you haven't already, please text Jane to 877-877 to get involved. See, we have many exciting volunteer opportunities that you can do from the safety of your home. And I'm going to tell you more about them towards the end of the call. But for now, please text Jane 877-877 to stay connected to our movement for climate justice. Today, we're going to dive right into the interview to be sure we have time for audience questions, and because I have a lot of questions for this very interesting woman. She's a mother. I discovered the other day that she owns an African gray parrot and a cat. I asked her a question and whoop, she lifted up the parrot and there it was. I love African grays. Mary Trump holds a PhD from the Derner Institute of Advanced Psychological Studies and taught graduate courses in trauma, psychopathology, and developmental psychology. She is the niece of Donald Trump and has written a New York Times #1 bestseller, Too Much and Never Enough: How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. It does. courage when you know that many weapons of power and of public opinion will be brought down on you in an attempt to dismiss you and diminish you and destroy you. It takes courage to grapple with the complicated dysfunctions of such a famous family when it's your very own family you're writing about. And it takes a special kind of person who can reveal what she does while also conveying empathy for those who were so deeply damaged by the Trump family patriarch. That would be the first Fred Trump. In a way, it's a book about quintessential patriarchy, the rule of the father, and how all suffer in its clutches. Welcome, Mary. Welcome. You're a brave and very smart woman, and I'm so grateful that you agreed to join me on this Fire Drill Friday. It's a real honor.
Oh, it's absolutely my honor. I appreciate your willingness to have me on and be a part of this. It's an extraordinary thing you've started here.
Thanks. You know, it's been noted that your book's already sold more than The Art of the Deal ever has. That must make you feel good.
It's going to get under Donald's skin, so that's always an extra added benefit. Yeah.
Good for you. So my first question is, I'd like to know why you want to come on to Fire Drill Fridays.
Like you, I believe that the climate crisis is and catastrophic climate change is the most serious issue affecting us. And we've lost, not only have we lost time, we've lost an international coalition that can most effectively deal with this crisis. So, we lose this battle, then nothing else really matters, does it?
I agree with you. Well, thank you. I'm so glad that it's something that you're aware of and care about. Thanks. And tell me a bit why you wrote the book and what the message of your book is.
I wrote the book because although I knew that Donald was going to be utterly disastrous in the Oval Office, I did not know how many people would be willing to line up behind him. And not only that, but to either overlook or champion his most egregious behaviors. So, one man contained might have done some damage, but he wouldn't have unraveled the American democracy the way he's been allowed to. So I've been alarmed since the Muslim ban, because not because I was surprised that he would be for that, but because of how many people in his administration and in his party were willing to go along with it. After I was the source for the New York Times article about my family's financial crimes, I felt that I had something concrete to point to, and the book came from that. And the message there are a lot of messages, but if I can boil it down to one thing, Donald is never going to get better, and he's only going to get worse.
Thank you for that. And I just want to say that if you're just tuning in, I'm Jane Fonda with Fire Drill Fridays in Greenpeace, USA, interviewing Mary Trump. And we're also live right now on Sirius XM Progress. If you're listening via Sirius XM and have a question you'd like to ask Mary Trump or me, call 1-866-997-4748. And if you're watching on the regular channels, please put your question in the chat boxes. So, Mary, help us understand why Trump insists on denying there's a climate problem. We know that he knows there's a problem. His company applied for a permit to build a seawall to protect his golf course in Ireland from the coastal erosion. And the permit actually said, due to global warming and rising sea levels. And in 2009, the U.S. was headed to the major climate conference in Copenhagen. And concerned U.S. business leaders and famous liberals took out a full-page ad in the New York Times. It was an open letter to President Obama and the U.S. Congress calling for aggressive climate action. In it, they declared, and this is a quote, "If we fail to act now, it is scientifically irrefutable that there will be catastrophic and irreversible consequences for humanity and the planet." And the ad also said that a shift to clean energy will spur economic growth and create new energy jobs. And among the signatories were Donald Trump and his adult children. So his climate denial isn't actually real. What's behind his refusal to address it?
Well, you know, Donald has no problem being a hypocrite. I think we have enough evidence to support that. It's expedience, you know, in one realm, it's helpful to him and financially valuable to him to suggest that there is a climate crisis, but politically, it would go against what his base has been trained to believe. And he's terrified of losing support because that's the only support he has. So I think, you know, he's going to do in the moment whatever is most useful to him and whatever will achieve his purpose. And it's crazy making. But the problem is, I've never heard a reporter point out what you just pointed out to him. You know, I've never heard anybody say to his face, well, you say climate change is a hoax, a Chinese hoax, then why did you sign this? Why were you a signatory on this ad? And why are your companies claiming that they're being negatively impacted by climate change if you now say it doesn't exist?
That's good. We'll make sure that he gets asked that, right?
Absolutely.
Let's talk about his heartlessness. Do you think it weighs on him that people are dying during the COVID pandemic? I mean, I don't even know if he cares. He plays live and let die at his rally. And when confronted by the numbers of people that are dying, he said, well, it is what it is. Can you explain the heartlessness?
Yeah, you know, the "it is what it is" comment sent a chill down my spine because that's a family catchphrase. Normally when people say that, they mean, you know, life is hard and circumstances are beyond my control, so I just have to roll with it. In Donald's case, and certainly in my grandfather's case, it means there's this problem that I could certainly do something about if I cared to bother, but I don't really care. So no, he doesn't. He's entirely indifferent to what's happening, because to confront COVID-19 initially would have been to admit that there was something wrong. And I know that he was worried that it would adversely affect the stock market, which is the only metric he seems to care about. But on a deeper level, by admitting there was something wrong in the world, he was probably afraid that it would somehow be laid at his feet, which is ironic because now it can be in this country. So months later, when it was unavoidable and people were starting to die, he couldn't admit that there was a problem because that would admit that admitting he had been wrong in the first place. And in my family, you can never be wrong because admitting that you were wrong or apologizing for anything was considered a weakness. And weakness in my family was very harshly punished.
Wow. That's scary. I thought because so many of his enablers and handlers have an ideological approach to it. They don't want anything done that would make the federal government look like it could really solve problems, could look like, it needed to be strong and robust to address these problems. And so he would do anything to prevent the federal government from being able to help. I thought maybe that was it, but it's just, he doesn't care.
No.
Wow.
No, and to what benefit is it of his, he would have to show empathy, which is difficult, if not impossible for him. And, he's managed to convince enough people in this country that being responsible and wearing a mask and social distancing makes you weak somehow. So he continues to be able to pretend that he's strong. And it's a mess.
Yeah. You know, I was fascinated by many things in your book, but you say here you were hired to write a book for him. Mm-hmm. And so you spent a lot of time with him and you sat next to him in his office for long periods of time. And you say here, the project had hit a wall. Besides, after all the time I had spent in his office, I still had no idea what he actually did. That just blows my mind. How could you, well, he had a company to run, right?
You know, one thing people don't understand about the so-called Trump organization is that, first of all, I think it was a sinecure that my grandfather set up for Donald to give him something to do. And secondly, it's very small. It's sort of like a mom and pop store of real estate. So he had people to do things that he should have been doing, you know, finding the deals and drawing up the contracts and negotiating. And I think he was sort of brought in at the last minute to bully people into giving him more or throwing temper tantrums. But it was quite astonishing because I had grown up with the myth that Donald was not only a self-made man, but he was a brilliant, brash real estate developer and entrepreneur. And there was absolutely no evidence of that in the few months I worked with him.
Wow, I guess it's the same thing now when he's in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't do anything.
Precisely.
Wow. And I was fascinated after you said that, let me just say here, you gave the New York Times the financial records from your grandfather's estate. Mm-hmm. And you said that part of the reason you did that was that you were convinced by one of the reporters, Suzanne Craig, that you have information that could help in a concrete way. Tell us what specific impact you hope these financial records will have in the lead up to the election.
You know, they didn't have the kind of impact in the moment we had hoped they would have, but it's now public knowledge that my family members committed these financial crimes. Whether or not the statutes of limitations have passed, that's important information. And my hope is that we've reached a tipping point, largely because of COVID-19 and the ensuing economic crisis we're facing, that things that he's done in the past are going to start to matter, that there's going to start to be a cumulative effect. And it's not going to be, we go from one crisis to the next and forget about the first one, that we're going to remember all of the things that he's done and all of the reasons he needs to be removed from the Oval Office.
I want to remind people, if you're just tuning in, I'm Jane Fonda with Fire Drill Fridays, interviewing Mary Trump. If you have a question for Mary, call 1-866-997-4748. And if you're just watching on a regular channel, you can put your questions into the chat box. One of your uncle's, Mary, most cruel manipulations has been to the working class, in my opinion, making them believe that he had their back, that he was a man of the people, when in reality, he's been propping up corporate elites and leaving millions of Americans to fend for themselves through multiple crises. What would your message be to those voters about what he really values?
Well, first of all, he doesn't value them. You're absolutely right about that. And, you know, I've never entirely understood that bit of alchemy in which a man who, even at the depths of his bankruptcies, was being supported by the banks to the tune of $450,000 a month, not a year, a month. that he was a man of the people. It's just kind of astonishing to me that he was able to pull that one off. So I think the most basic message would be, please stop voting against your self-interests. I mean, I know that that's been a longstanding Republican project to get people to do just that. But I would hope that what's happening now with COVID-19 and the joblessness that is a result of it, that people would start to understand that if he really cared, he would have made absolutely certain that everybody in this country had, like, I don't know, 80% of their income coming in every week until this crisis was contained. And he did not do that. And not only did he not do that, Mitch McConnell just declared a 1-month recess without having accomplished anything.
Okay, don't vote against your self-interest. In your book, you say his hiring and treatment of undocumented workers and his refusal to pay contractors for completed work were assumed to be just the cost of doing business. Treating people with disrespect and nickel and diming them made him look tough.
Yeah.
Is that at the root of his cruelty, just the need to look tough, the fear of being weak?
It's the fear of being weak, but even beneath that, it's just the fear. He's a terrified little boy underneath it all. And it makes sense that he is, given the horrors that he lived through as a child, but we're all suffering for it now. His cruelty also serves other purposes, but, part of it again is protecting him and other people from figuring out who he really is and what's going on inside. But sometimes it's a power play. If you have more money and more lawyers and more time than the other person on the other side, you will likely get what you want. And sometimes he's cruel because he enjoys it.
It's interesting because it's clear. Well, he says it. People don't love me. You don't love me. They don't love me. There's a need to be loved. So I would think that someone who had a need to be loved would be constantly doing things for people that would make them love him.
That's a great point, and it's actually one of the most tragic things about Donald, because of his very difficult early years. My grandmother got very ill when he was 2.5 years old, and essentially was unavailable to him for about a year. So he was essentially abandoned and left alone and terrified because my grandfather, the sociopath, was incapable of fulfilling the caregiver role and was not even interested in it in any way. So basically, what happened over the years is my grandfather created Donald to be somebody who could fill his own needs, right? And money and power and fame came to stand in for everything else. So when money is the only thing that matters, and it stands in for love and affection and care and respect, you're always going to be craving it, but you're never going to be able to get it, because my grandfather also turned Donald into somebody who's essentially unlovable.
Do you love him?
I don't, which is an awful thing to say. But
your empathy comes across.
Well, as a psychologist, it's really important to understand what happened to people when they were children in the context of the family system. And there are very, very few people who don't come from people with Donald's kinds of pathologies who don't come from some really horrible family. My grandfather is an exception. I think my grandfather was born a sociopath, but Donald, I don't believe was. He was turned into this man who was incapable of being loved, of loving, and of empathy. So I have enormous amounts of compassion for the child he was. he and his siblings, including my father, and probably especially my father, suffered horribly. That doesn't mean he shouldn't be held accountable. He absolutely needs to be held accountable. And, as soon as we win in November, that has to be at the very top of the list.
Got it. Whew. You say in your book, his cruelty serves in part as a mean to distract both us and himself from the true extent of his failures. The more egregious his failures become, the more egregious his cruelty becomes. Well, that's pretty scary. I guess we're going to be seeing a lot more cruelty between now and November as his numbers keep dropping, right?
Yeah, and that's very dangerous. And also the 78 days between the election and the inauguration could be even worse, depending on how things go on November 3rd. So we need to look out for it, but I think we're already seeing it. There's a deep cruelty in his continuing inaction on COVID-19. I mean, doing nothing at this point is cruel because he could easily be doing something to save lives and to prevent other people from getting sick. So, I think that it's a perfect and horrifying example of what I was talking about in the book.
Yeah. How do we keep our hope alive through this so that we don't become overwhelmed, so that we can keep fighting and winning?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? What I would say is if we don't remain hopeful, that we would be giving up way too early. We have to make it through the election, and we can't do that if we're despairing and depleted all the time. So, on the one hand, if we don't win, then everything's going to keep getting worse, including and especially the climate crisis. But if we do win, just think about how much we can accomplish, and let's let that vision of things keep us hopeful and optimistic.
So many things that Trump says and the policies he puts forth can cause such deep feelings of anger, despair, and hopelessness. How important is self-care during the Trump administration? And how does that help us to continue getting back up to keep fighting after so many devastating blows?
I'm going to be completely hypocritical now because I have not been doing a good job about that, but it is so important. It is the most important thing. And so is community.
Community, yes.
Yeah, because it's, especially during the health crisis and with the economy affecting people in very different ways, it's very easy to feel isolated. I've been feeling isolated since November 9th, 2016. So it's extraordinarily difficult under those circumstances to keep fighting for yourself, and your wellness. So I think if we remember to stay connected to each other, and we help each other be better in terms of, sleeping and eating properly and exercising and all of that stuff we should be doing, because, it doesn't seem like the election's that far away, but 3 months is a long time, and a lot can happen. Yeah. So, we have to treat this as a marathon, not a sprint, and really take care of ourselves and each other.
Yeah. Maybe it's a relay.
Yeah. You know what? That's actually an even better way of putting it, because that then allows us permission to say, I need to tap out for a little bit, and, sleep for a week or whatever the case may be, because it's exhausting.
Yeah. So sleep enough, eat healthy, do some exercise, keep moving, and stay part of a community. I think that the Fire Drill Fridays and asking people to join up and volunteer, I've been getting nice feedback that it's helping people avoid depression and stay, as long as you feel you're making a difference in doing something.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. And, I imagine that most people who are on the call today are probably look forward to this every week, because it's so easy to forget because of the onslaught of bad news we have to, deal with every day, that there are like-minded people in the world who really do care.
Yeah. There's been such an attempt over the last 40 years to make us very individualistic. I mean, we already, as a country, start off kind of more tilted in the individualism than other countries.
Right.
But we have to, I think I so agree with you, we really have to build community very intentionally in order to stay sane. Yeah. We're living at a time where more than ever we need to lean into challenging conversations with people who don't agree with us. I do all the time, but it can be hard to do that, to bridge the divide and not just walk away. As a clinical psychologist, can help us understand how we can best approach these conversations and ideally convince climate deniers that there's an emergency and that we need to act. What do you say?
I've thought about that a lot. And it is really hard when, there are people who refuse to see the truth in things, who refuse to acknowledge facts. Science is not a belief system, right? Climate change is not a matter of opinion. So, you spoke of the long-term Republican project to, promote individualism, which is a myth that this country has perpetuated for even longer than that. They've also done their best to keep people ignorant and to devalue expertise. So, how do you? And I guess I would say, we have to speak to people's own self-interests, even if that's hard, because obviously a lot of people are incredibly selfish right now. So it's easy to want to dismiss them out of hand and avoid dealing with them at all. But if we can try to appeal to people's own self-interests and help them understand that it isn't just about us, it's about our children. Maybe if we can start there with, our shared experiences and concerns, we might be able to, forge new alliances.
Like if you were a climate denier, I might say to you, but Mary, you love African gray parrots. Their habitat is being destroyed, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Because I know you have a parrot and you care about animals. So speak to where the person's interests are.
Yeah. And, just in the same way that hunters, and I'm totally anti-hunting as well, but a lot of hunters are conservationists because they understand the importance of the environment to keeping, animals abundant and healthy. And so, we may be coming at it from totally different angles, but if we all get to the same place, who cares? Right?
That's right. Who cares? I'd like to remind you, those of you who are watching or listening and not watching on Sirius XM, if you have a question to ask Mary Trump, call 1-866-997-4748 to ask your question. And if you're watching on regular channels, put your question in the chat boxes. Thanks. Mary, have you ever in your life witnessed your uncle change his opinion on anything when presented with the facts or apologize for something he's done?
Well, one of the reasons we're in the situation we're in right now is because he never had to. Nobody challenged Donald, ever. Even my grandfather, who was, didn't put up with nonsense from anybody, deferred to Donald. So he's been surrounded by a claque his entire life.
Wow.
So, why should that change now? Yeah, it's stunning.
Reading your book, I think a lot of us are surprised by it brings up a feeling of pity, of empathy for your uncle. And I hesitated to say this because there's no question that he's done things worthy of hate.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, if you hate him, he wins. Right. Do you feel it's possible to simultaneously feel compassion for him and still hold him to account for the atrocities he's committed?
I think it's important that we try, because, and I'm not talking about forgiveness. I'm not talking about, as you're suggesting, I'm not talking about letting him off the hook. You said to hold him to account, but that's an instance in which we need to appeal to people's self-interest. It is the only people we harm by hating other people is us, right?
Yeah.
So, I have said the word hate and felt the feeling of it more in the last 4 years, and maybe more in the last 6 months, than, the previous 50 years. It's debilitating. It's harmful. It's very harmful. So, we don't have to like him or, cut him slack for anything. He needs, by, held to account. I mean, the man should be in prison. So, we need to be really clear about what that means. But yeah, I think as hard as it is, in the long run, it's the best thing we can do for ourselves.
Yeah, evil actions are the language of the traumatized, and you can hate the actions, but not hate the person. Yeah.
Right.
So you write in your book, his pathologies have rendered him so simple-minded that it takes nothing more than repeating to him the things he says to and about himself dozens of times a day. He's the smartest, the greatest, the best, to get him to do whatever they want, whether it's imprisoning children in concentration camps, betraying allies, implementing economy-crushing tax cuts, or degrading every institution that's contributed to the United States' rise and the flourishing of liberal democracy. So is this why he's so vulnerable to strong men like Putin and Bolsonaro and Kim Jong-un?
Oh, yeah.
They just kiss his ass?
Absolutely. They kiss his ass. They probably promise him things that, will benefit him only, I would imagine, financial things. That's one of the things my grandfather did thoroughly. He rendered Donald somebody who was eminently useful to smarter, more powerful men. And it has put this country in a very dangerous situation, because it's not just that he's, actively trying to forge relationships with people like Putin, Kim Jong-un, Erdogan, Duterte, etc. It's that he's turning against our allies, because, he considers people who work together to form alliances, like the Western alliance that's been forged in the last 70 years. He considers them weak because it requires compromise and patience and a depth of understanding that's completely beyond him.
Boy. So here's a question for you. Joe Biden announced this week that Kamala Harris will be his running mate. And your uncle immediately reacted by calling her nasty and a phony and insulted her intelligence. Why do you think this is his go-to reaction?
Because it's my grandfather's go-to reaction. I grew up in a very misogynistic family. In fact, the women in my family were misogynists. That's how bad it was. So Donald has never really had to deal with strong women in a way who challenge him. So, he's going to pull out all the old chestnuts like nasty, which is something my grandfather used to say all the time. And it's just, as far as I'm concerned, it's just another display of weakness. He can't come up with anything else. So he reverts to type, right? And I think there's nothing that terrifies him more than a strong, fierce woman of color. So I think, as much as I dread this campaign and the nastiness that's going to be employed, I have a feeling that he's going to overplay his hand a little bit here, because he's not going to help him. He's not going to be able to help the misogyny and racism that he's going to be throwing at our future vice president.
Mary, how did you escape the pathology? How come you turned out okay, or better than okay?
Well, that's making an assumption. But I think I turned out better than the rest of them. Well, first of all, I was a generation removed from the worst of it. And, my grandparents weren't my parents, which is also a huge benefit. But one of the best things that happened to me is that I grew up in Jamaica, Queens. My grandparents' house was in Jamaica Estates, and Queens is part of New York City. Jamaica Estates was 100% white, 100% Christian, and very wealthy. Jamaica, on the other hand, which was literally the next town over, was working class, lower middle class, predominantly African American. I took the subway to school, and it just grounded me. It grounded me in a way that I don't think I would have been otherwise. So, that was a huge part of it. And also having the opportunity to go to camp on Cape Cod allowed me to appreciate nature in a way I wouldn't have if I'd been, stuck playing in parking lots all summer.
Good answers. It's become clear that a big part of Trump's strategy to steal the election is to sabotage the post office. So 2 questions. Has he ever personally been inside a post office? And why do you think he's decided that attacking the post office is the way to go?
Yeah, I don't think he's ever been in a post office. That's hysterical. Like, I literally can't even picture it. I don't even think he would know where to put a stamp on an envelope. But anyway, I think there are 2 reasons. One is he knows that it's going to be the way that most people are going to prefer to cast their ballots, because of there's a deadly virus still rampaging around the country. So it's just another Republican form of voter suppression. It's just a really, all voter suppression is egregious, but this one is orders of magnitude worse, because it's not just about taking away people's right to vote, which is horrific. It's also taking away access of people in rural communities to get services. It's making it much more difficult for veterans and older people to get their medication. It's just utterly disgraceful, and it's yet another American institution we never had to worry about before, disintegrating before our eyes, just like the State Department and the Justice Department. So the second reason, though, is because there's a bit of cruelty about that, isn't there? People are terrified they're going to get sick. They don't want to vote in person. So you know what? Let's force them to, or just let them not vote.
Yeah. We're going to be dealing in future Fire Drill Fridays with the issue of the post office and what to do. But all of the people in the know are saying that those who want to vote by mail, do it quickly, do it early, do it now. Yeah. Yeah.
Or get a hazmat suit so you're prepared.
There's that. Yeah. So it's also become clear that there's a very real possibility that the election won't end and there'll be a struggle to get him out of power. If he loses, do you think he'll leave peacefully?
It depends. If Joe Biden wins by a huge margin, I think, and you know, nobody, not even Bill Barr, can claim that the results are illegitimate. I think Donald will be so narcissistically injured that he'll have to do whatever he can to spin away from feeling that pain. And, you know, I can imagine him saying something like, I'm the greatest thing that's ever happened to this country. You don't deserve me. I'm going to go do something really important, like build Trump Tower in Moscow or work for Fox News. If it's close, that's more complicated, because it's not just Donald who isn't going to want to concede, because again, losing is not an acceptable thing to do ever. It's the people close to him who are benefiting so enormously from his position in the Oval Office. They're not going to want to cede the power or financial advantage they have. So I think a lot of people would try to talk him into sticking around and doing everything he could to overturn the election results, which is why, you know, we can't have a democracy if only half of the electorate votes. So we need to ramp up voter turnout in a way that we never have before. And just, you know, again, vote in such huge numbers that there's a landslide in Joe Biden's favor. We increase our number of seats in the House, and we take over the Senate. I say that as if it's an easy thing to do. It's not, but our lives depend on it.
Yeah. Why are you someone who likes Greenpeace? I'm told that you're a follower of Greenpeace and supports the fight against climate change.
It's a great organization. You know, I've been familiar with their work for a long time, and you know, I love their attitude and their willingness to take it to the powers that be. So yeah, huge supporter, huge fan.
Yeah, me too. I'm so happy that Fire Drill Fridays has become a project in the arms of Greenpeace. They're such a brave. They're the brave organization.
That's right.
Okay, one people, I just want to remind you, if you have a question for Mary, you can call 1-866-997-4748. That's 866-997-4748. I have one more question before we go to audience questions. If Donald Trump was in the room right now, what would you say to him?
Let's see. I think what I would say is that wow. You know what? I've changed my mind about this answer a few times, because I've had this question presented to me in a couple of different settings. I think what I would do is say, you know what, Donald, this isn't good for you. People care about you. I don't know if that's true or not, but people care about you. And, you know, this isn't going to end well if you stay here. So, you know, take care of yourself and go live a better life than the one you're living now. I mean, he's not going to listen to anything I say, so I would try to like maybe go the route, because he probably nobody ever talks to him like that, ever.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you, Mary, for that. And now we're going to go to audience questions. Maddie, I know there must be a lot of audience questions.
Yeah, we have some great questions lined up. So I'm going to bring Joe on the line. Joe is calling from Connecticut. Joe, what's your question for Mary?
Hi, Mary and Jane. I have a question. I write a progressive political blog. It's called The Issue Papers. Not surprisingly, I have many contentious online debates with members of Trump's base. And, you know, we've all known who Donald is. He's never hidden that fact that he's actually been telling us for years that, you know, he's a vile man who knows the cost of everything and the value of nothing. What I'm trying to understand and get underneath is the hate of those who support Donald. You know, it seems to be a lot of hate, a lot of animosity. And they vote against their democracy and they vote against their own self-interest. And the question I have is, what is your clinical perspective, your diagnosis, if you will, of Donald's base? Is it as simple as racism and fear and hate, or is there more to this?
Yeah, thank you for that. There is such a thing as an authoritarian personality, and it's not the authoritarian, it's the people who follow authoritarians. And I think that in any country, there's a significant minority of people, who are the base, who are angry and hateful and willing to vote against their own self-interest in order to make things worse for people who are other. I've always thought that one of the main purposes of liberal democracy was to contain those people. For various reasons. Since 2016, between 2016 and 2018, 100% of the United States government represented that 22%. So that's, I believe, why they're having an outsized impact, because although they've always existed, they've never had so much power. I think, people like that crave power because deep down they're very weak and they feel the need to follow strong leaders. Why they think Donald is strong, that I can't help you with because it blows my mind. But
thanks, Mary. From Barbara on Zoom, press reports today have said Trump is very close with his brother Robert and that he will visit him today in hospital. Mary, while this might indicate some shred of normal human emotion, I'm interested in your comment, your thoughts here.
I can't speak to what the relationship is like now, but, when I was still in the family, they hated each other. I'm glad Donald's visiting him in the hospital. I wish he had visited my dad in the hospital, but, that's good. I don't think, it doesn't change anything about who Donald is, unfortunately. But I know Rob has been sick a couple of times in the last 3 months or so. So, I hope he's doing okay.
All right. And we have a question from Carol in California. Carol, can you ask Mary your question?
Yes. Good morning. I am a retired psychiatric social worker, contemporary of Jane. I was out there in the 60s with you, Jane. I am very interested in family dynamics, family history, that type of thing, because it all, generation to generation, seventh generation. Do you know anything about your great-grandfather? What I have read is that he ran bordellos. He was a draft dodger, ran away from Austria, I think, and ran bordellos in Alaska and Seattle, and that's where he made his money. But he died young. He came to New York and died young, and left raising the family up to Donald's father. But do you know anything about that dynamic and what kind of person he was, and how that impacted your grandfather and then consequently Donald?
Thank you. Actually, my great-grandfather left Germany to avoid military service, so it's a theme. And he actually he died in the 1918 flu pandemic, which Donald seems not to have remembered. But what's also interesting is that I didn't know that either until I read about it a few years ago, because I never heard anybody in my family ever talk about my grandfather. My great-grandfather. So I think, this probably says more about my grandfather than his father, but when my grandfather was in his 70s, somebody asked him what kind of impact his father's death had on him, because he was 12 or 13 at the time. And he said, well, you know how kids are. It didn't really bother me. Like, okay. So Yeah, I guess there wasn't a lot of love lost in
Well, he got sick and died. He was a loser.
exactly. And that's a really good point too. If you're sick, if you have alcoholism, if you have COVID-19, you're bad. You should have been stronger.
Thanks, Mary. So a question from Joseph on Zoom. Do you find that Trump's very recent behaviors has shown his cognitive ability has declined even more so in recent years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know. I'm not his doctor. And I think it's alarming that somebody thought he should have a cognitive test, but I've always maintained that it's not that his cognitive health is deteriorating. It's that the situation has changed. He used to be allowed to have the run of the media and say whatever he wanted without question, without pushback. Now, for the first time in his life, he actually has to know what he's talking about, which he doesn't. And, he gets some pushback, although not enough. He gets questioned, although not enough. And it's the stress that he's under that I think is having a huge impact on his ability to think straight or string a sentence together.
Thanks, Mary. We have a question from Rob in Ohio. Rob, you're on the line now.
Yes, Jane, you're an amazing person, and it's just so wonderful speaking to you. And Mary Trump, you're on here?
Yeah.
Yes, I hope you can hear me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm 50 years old, and I grew up with a father that grew up in the Trumpiest of Trump counties, Pike County, Kentucky, which is right on the Appalachian. It's in the Appalachian region. It's all coal country. It borders West Virginia and Virginia. It's where LBJ took his, was it LBJ, Jane, that did his war on poverty? Remember my father talked about actually seeing him come down through there on the trains. And I'm sorry, it's just, I wonder what Trump would say, because these people down here, they believe that this man has been sent there, but whether if they're religious, then by God, if not, then to save them. And I wonder what Trump would even have to say to somebody that cannot afford to even have teeth. I mean, a lot of my family can't even afford teeth. I mean, dentures. And they live month to month, just, try to scrape by. I'm going down there right now. I'm actually taking a trip down there right now because I'm going to go and take an AC unit to my aunt, because it's in the 90s and it's just really burning up. But they love Trump, and I don't know what I can say to these people. And I really wonder if they were to fix a dinner, a wonderful dinner. I'm sure that he would love the food. But what would he say to people like this, to people?
Thanks, Mary. So I think Rob's original question was essentially, how would Trump behave around people from communities like that, and what would he say?
Well, first of all, he would never go to dinner at their house. So there's that. He would just talk about how great he is and how much better things are with him in the Oval Office, and he would lie to them. And I think one particular strain of white evangelicism has so corrupted people's ideas of religion and Christianity in particular that they're easily swayed by their churches to believe in the the deification of the Republican, whomever it might be. It's really disturbing, but again, it's another mechanism by which certain Republican voters have been convinced to vote against their own self-interests.
I'm sorry,
you,
Rob.
Yeah,
I know both of us really feel for your relatives, for your family, and how hard it must be for them. And hopefully with the new administration, their situation can improve. They'll be able to get teeth. Teeth are necessary. So I will pray on that.
Yeah, I absolutely. It's awful. And it's all, we talk about screaming into the void. Imagine if it's people you love and care about who continue not to hear what you're saying, even though they're suffering so horribly. So yeah. It's awful.
Yeah. So it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you, Mary. I hope that when this is all over, I can give you a real hug. I just want to hold you in my arms.
I will be there.
You could be my daughter.
That works for me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's meant a lot to me. And thank all of you for joining us. And those of you who listened on Sirius SM, thank you so much. Please consider joining our volunteer teams to build people power in the lead up to the election and beyond. You can sign up. Go to firedrillfriday.com/volunteer and sign up to be a volunteer with us. We're building a really large volunteer contact team with all kinds of wonderful, interesting responsibilities, and you'll receive training and you'll be part of a community, right, Mary?
Mm-hmm.
Firedrillfridays.com/volunteers. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.